In a previous movie, I described how to use conditional and logical operators to create logical expressions. That is, expressions that return a value of true or false. Once you know how to create those expressions, you can then write conditional code. That is, code that only executes when an expression returns a value of true or false. I'll demonstrate this in a project called If Then Else. In this project, my data entry form has a couple of new controls. I have one text input box with the name of txt input 1 and a second text input box this time that has a name of txt input 2. There's also a checkbox called numeric, and its actual programming name or identifier is chk numeric. Now I'll go to the code that executes when the user clicks the Go button. I double-clicked the Go button, and that opened the VB code behind file. In the run code subroutine, I've declared 3 variables, 2 strings that get their values from the text input controls, and 1 Boolean variable called eval_numbers. It gets its value from the isChecked property of the checkbox control. The first bit of code that I'll add will do a simple string comparison, asking if 2 values that the user has entered match each other. I'll start with the keyword if, and then I'll put in a logical expression of str1 equals str2. Whenever you use the keyword if, you must end that statement with then. Now, when I press enter, Visual Studio automatically adds an end if clause. The if statement always has to end with end if, and any code that you put between the if and the end if will be executed only if the logical expression is true. I'll add a call to my output method, and I'll output the string strings match. I'll run the application, and when I click the Go button the first time, I get the response strings match. I haven't entered any text into the 2 text boxes, so they both return empty strings, and therefore they're equivalent. Now I'll type my name into both text boxes. I'll clear the response and then click Go again, and once again I get strings match. The 2 values match. But if I change the second value, say from David to Joe, and then clear my output and click Go, nothing happens. That's because I haven't added any code that will execute in the other condition. That is, when the condition is false. So I'll go back to Visual Studio and I'll add a bit more code. To handle the other condition, the false condition, use the keyword else. Within an if statement, you can have one else statement. And I'll just do another bit of output, strings don't match. Now, if I type 2 values in and click the Go button, I get the alternative case. You can also add clauses called else if. Else ifs go after an if but before the else, and you can have as many as you need. For example, let's say I wanted to evaluate the 2 strings and see if one was greater than or less than the other. I'll place the cursor after the first output, and then I'll add else if. Notice that else if is a single word. It's not 2 separate words, else space if. This is its own conditional statement. Its syntax is just like if. You have to follow it with the conditional expression and then the keyword then. And I'll ask the question, else if str1 is greater than str2. And if that's the case, I'll output string 1 is greater than string 2. And I'll change the output in the else clause to string 2 is greater than string 1, because now I have 3 possible conditions: a match, string 1 greater than string 2, or string 2 greater than string 1. I'll type a value of string 1 and string 2 and click Go, and I get string 2 is greater than string 1. Then I'll change the values and click Go again, and there's the response. Next, let's see what happens when you use if and else statements on numbers, and also how you can nest if-else statements within each other. I'll go to my code and place the cursor after the existing conditional code block. Then I'll add a new code block, and I'll first find out whether the user has entered valid numbers. I'll examine eval_numbers. The eval_numbers variable is already a Boolean. That is, it's already guaranteed to return a true or a false value, so I don't have to compare it to anything else. If eval_numbers is true, then I'll ask another question, and I'll use the isNumeric function that I described in a previous video. I'll ask if isNumeric str1 and isNumeric str2. If both strings are numeric, then I can do numeric evaluations on them. And if they aren't, I can't. So I'll add an else clause and output the message, strings can't be converted to numbers. Now, if the values can be converted, I'll convert them and then compare them. So inside the if clause, I'll declare a couple of new variables. The first one will be called dbl1, and it'll be a double value. And I'll get its value by calling double.parse, and I'll parse str1. Then I'll copy and paste that code, and I'll change the second one so that I'm creating a new variable called dbl2. I now have two numeric values I can match, and I'll add yet another nested conditional. I'll ask if dbl1 matches dbl2, and if so, I'll output the message numbers match. Then, just as I did with strings, I'll handle the other conditions. If dbl1 is greater than dbl2, then I'll output value 1 is greater than value 2. And in the else clause, I'll copy and paste that message and change it to say that value 2 is greater than value 1. I'll scroll down a bit so we can see this entire conditional block, starting with this if statement and ending with its matching end if. So we have three if-then statements. First asking if the user wants us to evaluate numbers, then checking whether they've entered values that can be converted to numbers, and then the most deeply nested code that's comparing the values and seeing whether they match. I'll run the code, and first, I'll once again type in values and check the numeric checkbox, but I haven't entered values that can be parsed as numbers. And I get the expected message, strings can't be converted to numbers. I'll clear the output and change the values so that they match. I'll click Go, and I'll see that the strings match and the numbers match. But now, I'll type in values that can be converted to numbers but don't match, and I'll see the response, and I'll see that string 2 is greater than string 1, but value 1 is greater than value 2. That's because when we're evaluating these as numbers, 73 is greater than 9, but when evaluating as strings, 9 is greater than 73, because the initial character, 9, is a higher number than 7. So that's a look at how to use if, then, else, and else if. You can use them in any combination you need to. You can nest if statements within each other, and you can use these statements to evaluate any logical expression.